She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the glowing sign that read St. Agnes Medical Center. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She hadn't seen her father in 6 years, not since the bitter argument that severed their already fragile bond. And now, out of nowhere, the call had come. "He's asking for you," the nurse had said. "He doesn't have long." Rachel pushed open the car door and ran, her boots splashing through puddles. The corridors inside smelled of antiseptic and despair, and every fluorescent light buzzed like it resented its own existence. She was soaked, breathless, and trembling by the time she reached room 417. Her father, Thomas Morgan, lay motionless in the bed, his once commanding frame now withered and pale. Tubes snaked from his arms, machines beeped in slow, irregular rhythm. For a second, Rachel thought she was too late, until his eyes fluttered open. "Rachel," his voice was barely audible, paper thin. "You came." "I'm here," she whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm here, Dad." He motioned weakly toward the nightstand, his fingers twitching with effort. Rachel followed his gaze and found a sealed envelope marked with her name in shaky handwriting. She picked it up carefully, confused. "What is this?" He looked at her with tears in his eyes, tears she'd never seen him shed, not even when her mother left. "I should have told you sooner. Everything is in there." His hand dropped to the bed, limp. The monitor went flat. Rachel stood frozen as nurses rushed in. Someone gently guided her out of the room, speaking in low, practiced tones, but she heard none of it. Her ears rang, her body moved on autopilot, but her mind was stuck on the letter in her hand, on the words she wasn't ready to read. Back in her apartment, hours later, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the letter before her like a sleeping beast. Rain still lashed against the windows. With shaking hands, she peeled it open. The first line made her stomach drop. "Rachel, I'm not your biological father. I raised you as my own, but the truth has waited long enough." Her breath caught. The letter continued, each sentence carving cracks into the foundation of her identity. Her real father, a name she recognized instantly, a man with global power whose face she had seen on the covers of Forbes and Tech World, a man she had once brushed past at a fundraiser, never imagining there was blood between them. And at the very end of the letter, scribbled in rushed ink, was something even more chilling. "Be careful who you trust. There are things about your past you were never supposed to find." Rachel stared at the words, the letter trembling in her grasp. She had thought this visit was about saying goodbye. Instead, it was the beginning of everything she never knew, and everything someone clearly didn't want her to find. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat curled on the couch, still in her rain-soaked clothes, the letter spread out before her like a roadmap to a life she didn't know was hers. Her mind spun with a single thunderous name, Julian Voss. She had read it twice, 3 times, but it didn't feel real. Julian Voss, billionaire tech magnate, founder of Voss Tech, a man whose name carried the weight of empires. Was her biological father? It was impossible. It was absurd. And yet, a flicker of memory surfaced, a charity gala years ago when she was in college. She had attended on a scholarship, a seat filler in a room of titans. Julian had been the keynote speaker. Polished, magnetic, intimidating. He'd brushed past her in the hallway. Their eyes had met. For a fleeting second, she remembered the odd tightness in her chest. Not awe, but something stranger. Familiarity? She hadn't thought of it since. Until now. Rachel picked up the letter again, scanning the section that described the affair in clipped, guilt-ridden detail. Her mother, Eleanor, had been a junior software developer at Voss Tech in the late 80s, brilliant, ambitious, and quietly rebellious. She and Julian had fallen into a dangerous, short-lived affair. At the time, he had been married to the glamorous and enigmatic socialite, Vivian Voss, a woman who, not long after the affair ended, had mysteriously disappeared. Rachel pressed her fingers to her temples, heart racing. She tried to recall every memory of her mother that might align with this revelation. There had always been a certain guardedness in Eleanor, a melancholy, a bitterness she never explained. And Thomas, the man she'd believed was her father, had always seemed wounded, as if he were carrying the weight of something unspoken. Now she understood why. She spent the next day digging. She combed through every article, interview, and archived blog post connected to Julian Voss. His life was a curated portrait of success. A meteoric rise from coder to billionaire, a high-profile marriage, the mysterious vanishing of his wife, and the resulting media circus. No charges were ever filed. The case went cold, but the whispers never died. One article caught her attention. An old exposé from 20 years ago that mentioned a possible affair with a subordinate, buried deep in speculative reporting. No name was ever printed. But Rachel knew. That subordinate was her mother. And then there was something even more disturbing. A grainy photo accompanying a piece from a tech conference in New York 10 years ago. In the background, Julian stood surrounded by press. But off to the side, blurred yet unmistakable, was Rachel. She had been there covering the event as a journalism student. She stared at the image, her stomach twisting. What were the odds? Had he seen her? Had he recognized something in her? Or, worse, had he known all along? Rachel sat back, overwhelmed by a growing sense that her life had been brushed, shaped, and shadowed by Julian Voss without her knowing it. But why had her mother never said a word? Why had her father, Thomas, chosen to tell her only at the edge of death? The final line of the letter echoed in her mind again. Be careful who you trust. She was no longer just a woman searching for answers. She was the daughter of a man with more secrets than power, and she was beginning to wonder if some of those secrets were still watching her. The air in Rachel's small apartment grew heavy as the pieces of her father's letter began to settle like shadows on the walls. Julian Voss's wife, Vivian, had vanished without a trace decades ago. The story was whispered in old headlines and hushed conversations within Silicon Valley's elite, but Rachel had never connected the dots. Now every thread tugged at her like a fraying rope. Determined to understand, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, a laptop open to a maze of archived news articles, police reports, and faded photographs. She traced the timeline carefully. Vivian Voss disappeared the summer of 1998, just months after her husband's affair with Eleanor had ended. What struck Rachel was how quickly suspicion had fallen on her mother. One article, yellowed with age and nearly illegible, revealed a police report stating that Eleanor Morgan had been questioned extensively. Rumors of jealousy, threats, and a fiery confrontation at a gala circulated in the tabloids, though no charges were ever filed. Eleanor had moved away soon after, her career derailed and reputation tarnished. Rachel's throat tightened. She knew her mother had endured hardship, but she'd never shared the full story. She had buried it deep, behind smiles and late-night silences. And now Rachel had to wonder what had really happened that summer night. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling, and called the only person she thought might have answers. Eleanor's old friend, Karen Whitman, who had worked alongside her mother at Vostech. The call connected after several rings. Karen, it's Rachel Morgan. I need to talk about my mother, about Vivian Voss's disappearance. There was a long pause, then a sigh, heavy and weary. I was hoping you'd never ask, Karen said softly. Your mother, she was caught in something far worse than anyone suspected. Vivian wasn't just missing. She was feared gone for good. But Eleanor? She always said she didn't do it. Karen's voice dropped. There were whispers that Julian had enemies. Powerful people who didn't want the truth to come out. Vivian got caught in the crossfire, and Eleanor, she was collateral damage. Rachel felt the weight of those words settle like stones in her chest. Was her mother innocent, or was she protecting something, or someone? Was her own existence part of a secret no one wanted unearthed? As night fell, Rachel's mind swirled with questions that only deepened the mystery. The missing wife, the silenced mother, the powerful man at the center of it all. The past was not done with her, and neither was the danger. Rachel's days blurred into a restless haze. Every phone call, every email felt like a fragile lifeline, and every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer than it should. The more she uncovered, the heavier the weight pressing on her chest. And then, the feeling started. Someone was watching. At first, she dismissed it as nerves. She was unraveling a tangled web of lies, after all. But the sensation wouldn't go away. a lingering presence in the periphery of her vision. The faint crunch of footsteps behind her on empty streets, flickers of movement just beyond the glow of streetlights. One evening, as she left a small cafe where she had met with Karen Whitman, Rachel noticed a figure waiting across the street. Cloaked in a heavy, dark hoodie, the person's face was obscured in shadow. Their posture was rigid, still, almost statuesque. Rachel's pulse quickened. She crossed the street with a purpose. But when she reached the spot, the figure was gone. The next day, she found a small envelope slipped under her apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just a single folded note. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Stop digging. Some secrets are better left buried." The message sent a cold wave of fear crashing through her. Who was watching? And how much did they know? Rachel's mind flashed back to the letter. The warning from her father, the chilling hint that some truths put a target on her back. Now, it was no longer abstract. It was real. She tried to shake off the dread, but it clung to her like a second skin. She began noticing small things. Her mail rifled through, her phone occasionally glitching, untraceable calls that ended in silence. Determined not to be intimidated, Rachel started taking precautions. She changed her routines, checked over her shoulder, and researched discreetly from public libraries instead of her apartment. Still, the feeling of being watched gnawed at her every moment. Late one night, as she sat poring over old files on her laptop, a shadow flickered outside the window. She froze, heart hammering, staring into the darkness. For a fleeting second, the silhouette of a figure, hooded and still, was illuminated by a passing car's headlights. Then it vanished. Rachel realized with a sinking certainty. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous this became. Someone was desperate to keep her silent. And this stranger in the shadows was only the beginning. Silicon Valley gleamed under the morning sun like a fortress of glass and steel, a world away from Rachel's modest Ohio upbringing. But beneath the gleaming surface of innovation and wealth, she sensed a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Armed with a freelance writer's press badge and a carefully fabricated resume, Rachel stepped through the imposing revolving doors of Vostech headquarters. The sleek lobby buzzed with polished professionals and quiet surveillance cameras, their unblinking lenses feeling more like sentinels than helpers. Her temp job in the corporate archives was meant to be a cover, a way to move freely through the data veins of the company without raising suspicion. But almost immediately, Rachel felt the weight of invisible eyes on her. She found herself shadowed in the hallways, followed by a man who seemed to vanish whenever she tried to catch a glance. Despite the tension, Rachel dove headfirst into the files. Late nights spent scouring digital records, emails, and security footage uncovered disturbing patterns. Surveillance logs showed repeated mentions of Subject Morgan, tracking her movements not only in Silicon Valley but back in Ohio, as if the company had been watching her long before her father's letter arrived. She stumbled across internal communications hinting at containment protocols and disinformation strategies. It was clear, Vostech didn't just innovate tech, it wielded power to control narratives and silence threats. One file held a folder of photographs, images taken from afar, showing Rachel at events she had barely remembered attending. One grainy shot captured Julian Voss himself in a shadowy conference room, glancing toward a young woman in the crowd, a woman who looked startlingly like Rachel. The deeper she dug, the more Rachel felt like a pawn in a corporate chess game she barely understood. There were encrypted messages, hidden subfolders, and whispered rumors of a covert project codenamed Legacy, details so heavily redacted they might as well have been erased from existence. One evening, as she was about to log off, an encrypted file blinked open on her screen, a message addressed to her, typed with cold precision. "We've been watching. Stay away, or risk everything." Her breath caught. This wasn't just about family secrets anymore. It was about survival. Rachel knew she was stepping into a war zone, a place where power, money, and deception collided. But turning back wasn't an option. Because somewhere in this maze of silicon and steel was the truth she had been searching for. Rachel's heart pounded as she dialed the number she had tracked down after weeks of desperate searching. This was it. the moment she'd been both dreading and craving. To finally meet the other side of the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life. The phone rang twice before a cold, measured voice answered. Ethan Voss. Hearing the name spoken aloud sent a shiver through Rachel. Julian Voss's legitimate son, the heir apparent to the Voss tech empire, and, until now, a stranger she never knew existed. I'm Rachel Morgan, she said steadily. Julian Voss is my biological father. I need to talk. There was silence on the other end, thick and heavy. Before Ethan spoke again, his tone guarded. Proof, he said simply. I don't entertain claims without it. Their first meeting was arranged in a sleek downtown cafe, the kind of place where power brokers slipped into dark suits and secrets dripped beneath the polished surface. Rachel arrived early, nerves coiled tight, scanning the room until her eyes locked on a man sitting alone in the corner. Ethan Voss was every bit the image his reputation suggested. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. There was a chill in his gaze, a careful calculation that made Rachel wonder if he saw her as a threat or an inconvenience. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he fixed her with a piercing stare and said, "You're late." The conversation that followed was a battle of wills. Ethan demanded DNA proof. Rachel shared what little she had. The letter, fragments of her father's secret files, the story of Eleanor's affair. He listened, unreadable, before revealing a startling truth. We've known about you, Ethan admitted quietly, long before you showed up. Rachel's breath caught. Watched you. Assessed you. His words hung between them like a knife. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to protect you or silence you, Ethan said, voice low but fierce. Because your existence threatens everything my father built and everything I'm supposed to inherit. For a moment, the two stood on the knife's edge between alliance and enmity. Rachel saw glimpses of a man shaped by legacy, burdened by expectation and willing to fight to protect it. But was Ethan a brother who might one day stand by her side? Or the greatest danger she'd ever face? As they parted ways, the question lingered, sharper than ever. The moment Julian Voss learned of Rachel's identity, the fragile veil of secrecy shattered. But instead of a father's embrace, Rachel was met with cold suspicion and harsh words that cut deeper than any blade. Julian's mansion was an imposing fortress perched above Silicon Valley's glittering skyline. When Rachel was summoned there under the guise of a family discussion, she felt a mix of hope and dread twisting inside her. The grand oak door swung open to reveal Julian, frail yet imposing, his piercing eyes like steel traps. He studied her carefully, a flicker of recognition sparking behind his guarded demeanor. Prove it, he said bluntly, his voice laced with years of bitterness. You're either a con artist or a mistake. Rachel's fingers clenched the DNA test results she'd found buried deep in Julian's private files. A test confirming their biological link, though someone had clearly tried to destroy the evidence. The test had been hidden, suppressed, as if the truth was dangerous enough to erase. I have proof, she said quietly, sliding the file across the polished mahogany table. Julian's face darkened as he flipped through the documents. But before he could respond, a sudden knock echoed through the room. The door opened and Ethan stepped inside, his expression unreadable. I don't trust her, Ethan said coldly. Not yet. And neither should you. The siblings faced off, the room thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Julian's weary eyes darted between them, burdened by decades of secrets and lies. Meanwhile, Rachel uncovered whispers of a sabotage campaign, files detailing attempts to manipulate evidence, silence witnesses, and undermine her claim. Someone was desperate to keep her out of the picture. As betrayal tightened its grip, Rachel realized the fight was far from over. Blood ties were tangled with deception, and every step forward threatened to drag her deeper into a dangerous game. Her father, once distant and broken, was now a man caught between loyalty and guilt. Her brother, once a stranger, was a looming threat. And Rachel herself stood at the center of a storm, where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Rachel's world tilted on its axis when an unexpected voicemail arrived one rainy afternoon, a voice she hadn't heard in years, trembling yet unmistakably familiar. "Rachel, it's me," her mother's voice. Rachel's breath caught, the sound stirring memories long buried beneath years of silence and grief. Eleanor Morgan, presumed dead in a car accident when Rachel was just a teenager, was alive and hiding. The voicemail contained a series of cryptic directions, leading Rachel to a remote cabin nestled deep in the forests of Northern California. The journey there was fraught with anxiety, the winding roads and dense trees echoing the tangled past she was about to face. When she arrived, the cabin looked worn but inhabited, a place frozen in time where every creak and whisper held a secret. Inside, Eleanor waited, eyes shadowed with fear and sorrow. "I never wanted you to find me," Eleanor confessed, her voice a fragile thread. "Not until I knew you were ready." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as her mother revealed the truth behind that fateful night decades ago, the night Vivian Voss vanished and Eleanor's life shattered. Vivian hadn't just disappeared. She'd been silenced, caught in a brutal power struggle within the Voss empire. Julian had tried to protect his family, but the enemies they made were ruthless. Eleanor had been forced to vanish, to disappear from the world to keep Rachel safe. "It was never your fault," Eleanor whispered, cradling Rachel's hands. "I loved you fiercely." But some truths were too dangerous to share. As the pieces fell into place, Rachel realized her mother's absence wasn't abandonment. It was sacrifice, a desperate act to shield her daughter from a storm that was still raging. But now, with the past rising like a tide, Rachel knew the silence had ended. Her mother's secrets were alive, and so was the danger. Together, they prepared to face the shadows that had haunted their family for years, because the missing mother had returned. Julian's health was deteriorating rapidly, his once commanding presence now fragile and uncertain. Just as Rachel dared to hope for a semblance of acceptance, a new bombshell dropped. A freshly drafted will surfaced, naming Rachel as co-heir to the sprawling Vostek empire alongside Ethan. The announcement sent shockwaves through the media and corporate circles alike. Headlines screamed about the illegitimate heiress, and family feud explodes. The quiet war Rachel had feared was now blazing openly. Ethan was swift and merciless in his response. Behind his polished veneer lay a ruthless strategist who would stop at nothing to protect his claim. Legal teams descended like vultures, filing injunctions, contesting the will's validity, and dragging Rachel into grueling courtroom battles. Meanwhile, coordinated media smears painted her as a manipulative opportunist, a pawn in a ploy to dismantle the family legacy. But the attacks weren't just professional, they were personal. One night, Rachel returned to her apartment to find the door ajar, drawers rifled through, and the letter from her father missing. Her heart pounded in terror. Someone had violated her sanctuary. She contacted the police, but Vostek's shadow stretched far, influence that seeped into law enforcement and beyond. Rachel knew the warnings had escalated into outright threats. "This isn't just about money," she told Eleanor in hushed urgency. "It's war." Desperate for allies, Rachel leaned into unexpected friendships forged in the crucible of danger. Whistleblowers from within Vostek, disgruntled employees with grudges against Ethan's faction, and loyal confidants from her past. Every step forward was met with new traps and betrayals. But giving up was not an option. The inheritance was more than an empire. It was the key to her identity, her father's legacy, and her future. And as the legal battle raged, Rachel steeled herself for the ultimate showdown. Because in this war, only the cunning survived. The air in Julian Voss's private study was thick with tension, heavy like the years of secrets that had piled up around them. Rachel stood face to face with a man who had been both a stranger and a mystery for most of her life, a man on the brink of death, his frailty contrasting sharply with the iron will still burning in his eyes. "Before I go," Julian rasped, voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you deserve to know." Rachel's breath hitched. She braced herself for answers, but nothing prepared her for the confession that followed. Julian revealed his dark role in the disappearance of his wife, Vivian, a calculated act born from fear and betrayal. But the true puppeteer behind the shadows was not him, Ethan, her half-brother, whose cold ambition had twisted into something far more sinister. "I tried to protect you," Julian said, tears slipping down his cheeks. But Ethan, he orchestrated it all to secure the Empire. He silenced Vivian, manipulated me, and tried to erase you from existence. Rachel's mind reeled. Every threat, every act of sabotage, Ethan's handiwork. The room seemed to close in around her as the weight of betrayal settled like ice. Ethan's name echoed in her ears, not as a brother, but as an enemy. Now Rachel faced the ultimate choice. Expose Ethan and shatter the Voss dynasty, destroying everything the family had built, including the legacy her father fought to protect. Or take her place at the top, embracing the power she had fought so hard to claim, and reshape the empire from within. The final moment was hers. With the truth burning like wildfire inside her, Rachel knew one thing for certain. No matter what she chose, her life and the legacy of the Voss family would never be the same.